I'm a historian, and when I look at the modern history of overseas Indian migration, what strikes me is that it has always been circular in nature. I wrote a book covering about the 100 years from the 1830s to the 1930s, and at a rough estimate, during that century, approximately 30 million Indians traveled overseas. There were merchants and financiers, soldiers and laborers, professionals and service people, and nearly 24 million returned. So if there was in fact something of a drain, it was 6 out of 30 million. Then of course there was a certain kind of reversal in demographic flows during the uncertain years of the Depression and the Second World War. And after independence, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, we began to express some concern, and we often lamented the brain drain from India. The best talent seemed to be going overseas. Even those who had the opportunity of studying at the best institutions here would be finding opportunities abroad. But by now, in the early 21st century, it looks as if the brain drain is a thing of the past, at least anecdotally. There still remains to be careful studies to be made of this process, but we know that there are many able and competent Indians, professionals in the main, who, having done well abroad, are coming back to the new India and trying to contribute to India's development in the 21st century. And India is, of course, part of the broader resurgence of Asia. And India appears to be recovering, along with China, in the early 21st century, the position that it may have lost in the global context during the course of the late 18th century. And our Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, when he went to the United States recently, described the Indians there as a brain bank. He tried to change the discourse from laments about brain drain. I will begin by posing a question to each of the panelists, and I'll address the first question to Anupama Arya, because she personifies in many ways the topic that we are going to address. She went to the United States, she studied there, she worked there, was extremely successful in Silicon Valley, and then she came back here, and she's the head of Mobera Systems Private Limited, based in Chandigarh, the place from where she had left. And the question that I would pose to her is, why did she go abroad when she did? And then what motivated her to come back? And I might also ask sort of a complementary sort of question. I am an academic, and when I see the state of higher education in India, I begin to wonder whether we have established the conditions for a reverse flow of talent. And even though I come and lecture at Indian universities, on every occasion that I return to this country, and I come back at least 6 times a year, I work in the United States, I'm proud of my Indian citizenship, I've held on to my Indian passport. I found last night that the arrivals form has become a little more complicated. There are at least 3 categories of Indians, apparently, who live abroad these days. But you've taught at Berkeley and another institution in California. Had you been an academic, would you have come back? Or was the fact that you're an entrepreneur in a particularly dynamic sector that enabled you to come back to India to make a contribution in this country?
So many questions, and let me start with what motivated me to go to the US. And the reasons were very much alike, the same as a lot of my other friends. The opportunity to work, to study in the best university, the opportunity to work in a world-class company, The story and the belief that it would be a more free society, both from the economic opportunity point of view and as well as from the social point of view, and a better standard of living. All these were motivators and drivers to at least go and try and see what's out there, with no big agenda or plan to settle or to come back, and just go with an open mind. And I remember all throughout my stay there, every few years we would get together and say, oh, we have to go back. And it never seemed right. The time never seemed right to do that. And come 2003, 14 years out, almost 2004, we did take the plunge to come back, and for personal reasons primarily, to be with the family and take care of responsibility of the family. But there were other good drivers to making that decision as well. And the first was, of course, that the economy was doing tremendously well. There was an opportunity to participate in that economy and do well as a result of that. The stories we heard from people who had gone back, and there were lesser and lesser number of people trying the experiment of India and coming back to the US. They were feeling quite comfortable. Their families had adjusted. The wives were happy. They had domestic health. The airports were looking increasingly better every day. The malls were helping out. The coffee shops and the restaurants, and it just seemed like, well, the infrastructure is improving. We're also getting all these goodies, and so hence it is a viable option. The schools were becoming better. The salary packages were exciting enough. And the opportunity of growth to head an organization which could be based out of Asia, and you could be the head of that and a regional head, that was increasingly looking more and more possible. And the expat salary initially was the icing on the cake. So all those factors were big drivers in considering the decision to move back. But I think even beyond that, because I made the decision of not going to Delhi or Bangalore or Bombay, but to come to Chandigarh. And part of that was my own personal reason. Part of it was a hope that the big changes that were happening in the metros were also spreading to other towns. And in my process of setting up a contract R&D company out of Chandigarh, I realized that a lot of them had. And I'll mention a few. That the very fact that they could be successful first-generation entrepreneurs, whether they were in the story of Mr. Murthy or Mr. Nadar or others, was a story that was very encouraging. Second, that as I worked my way through making my own company work, to realize that the old mindset, that having a career as a researcher or having a career as an entrepreneur was not a socially acceptable norm, was slowly breaking and changing, which was a very, very encouraging viewpoint from my perspective. Because if more people have to utilize and participate in the vision of India, then more of them have to take to becoming entrepreneurs. And there was initially, what I observed, a big barrier to that, that if my son or my daughter takes that up and he doesn't go to an MNC in a salaried job, he's a loser. And that is changing every day in large and giant proportions. This was very encouraging. And lastly, I feel from the point of view of innovation, the market was changing. There was a time when the development, the market, the money all happened in a developed country. So you're making a product for US or Europe, you're selling it there, you're innovating there, you're getting venture capital money there. All that is happening outside. But over the last few years, I've seen that the market was, yes, still maybe US and Europe because you got the most out of it, but the development was slowly moving to India, and the management team could be anywhere. But now I see for segments like mobile technologies and other areas where the market is also in India. So the engineers are there, the market is there, the venture capital firms are there, so there is this big ecosystem that is developing which is going to change. And it will have, I feel, as the capacity to absorb the large number of people who are looking to come back. Right? There will be a viable opportunity for them to participate and get not only the benefit of being professionally satisfied, but also emotionally and personally satisfied from the point of view of having their family close by. And that, I think, is a very good tipping point and a very nice and neat place to be in. I think your last question was about, if I was an academician, would I come back? I think I would have dared to come back, definitely. I can't particularly comment on what exactly the higher education standard and how I would have reacted there, because that is not a path I took, but I think I would have tried and experimented with it.